They say we are adaptable, a species born of chaos and driven by an insatiable hunger for the new. They are right, but they have no idea what that truly means. The interstellar Concordium Council chamber pulsed with a nervous energy that could be tasted, a bitter static on the tongue of every delegate present. It was always a spectacle, this grand assembly of civilizations, a kaleidoscope of biological design and philosophical divergence, all attempting to maintain a fragile peace. But today the tension was a living thing, coiling in the air, because today the Cathar were making their demands. I am Elias Thorne, a diplomatic attaché, and I'd seen my share of interspecies theatrics, but nothing quite like this. The Cathar had only recently emerged from the Veil Nebula, a dense region of space previously thought uninhabitable, and their reputation preceded them like a storm front. They were beings of hardened chitin and sharpened purpose, standing nearly 4 meters tall, their 4 limbs ending in devastating bladed appendages. Their faces, if you could call them that, were a series of overlapping plates, revealing only 2 glowing, multifaceted eyes that seemed to absorb all light and warmth. They communicated in a series of resonant clicks and guttural roars, filtered by a translator that struggled to convey their sheer, unyielding will. Ambassador Javery, our lead diplomat, a woman of infinite patience and an uncanny ability to find humor in existential threats, leaned over to me. Think they'll demand the buffet first, Elias. I hear Cathar metabolism runs hot. I offered a strained smile. More likely a significant portion of the Orion arm, Ambassador. Their historical records indicate a preference for real estate. The grand entrance to the chamber, a monolithic arch of solidified plasma, hissed open with an unnecessary grandeur, revealing the Cathar delegation. 3 of them, colossal and imposing, strode in, their heavy, jointed steps echoing through the vast space. Every delegate instinctively flinched, shrinking into their ergonomic seats. The Cathar weren't just physically intimidating. They exuded an aura of predatory efficiency, a silent promise of inevitable dominance. The lead Cathar, identified by his larger, more elaborate head plates, slammed a bladed appendage onto the central plinth, producing a sound that vibrated through the chamber's very structure. "We have arrived," the translator clicked, its synthesized voice surprisingly calm given the raw power of the Cathar's own vocalizations. "We claim the disputed sectors, as is our right, as the apex species of this new frontier." A palpable shudder ran through the assembly. Nobody wanted to be the first to object to these creatures. The luminari, beings of pure light and crystalline thought, dimmed their internal luminescence. The ancient, tree-like etheri shifted their massive roots uneasily. Even the normally unflappable chitinoid delegates, with their rigid bureaucratic protocols, froze mid-gesticulation. Then, the chamber doors hissed open again, disrupting the tense silence. And in walked us. "Sorry we're late," chirped Dr. Aris, our xenobotanist, already unwrapping what looked like a particularly dense protein bar. Navigation systems were a nightmare trying to thread the needle through that accretion disk. Who knew space dust could be so particulate? I sighed, adjusting my own jacket. This was us, humanity in a nutshell. Casual, perpetually delayed, and utterly, obliviously themselves. We were just 3 humans. Ambassador Javery, radiating a disarming blend of warmth and steely resolve. Dr. Aris, brilliant but perpetually distracted by the nearest botanical curiosity. And me, Elias Thorne, a quiet observer, trying to make sense of the cosmos and our place within it. We wore standard diplomatic fatigues, which on us inevitably looked more like slightly wrinkled business casual. The Cathar, for the first time in recorded history, looked utterly bewildered. Their multifaceted eyes swiveled, focusing on our comparatively diminutive forms. Their fearsome reputation had reportedly caused entire fleets to surrender without a fight, yet here we were, ambling in like we were late for a brunch meeting, not a cosmic confrontation with a galactic superpower. "The Cathar are here," Ambassador Javery noted, her voice utterly devoid of fear, as if she were simply pointing out a particularly interesting weather pattern. "Ah, excellent. We were hoping to catch you all. Listen, we've been working on this fantastic proposal for a cultural integration program. Tell me, how do you feel about collaborative resource management?" The silence that followed was so profound it felt like a physical pressure, crushing the very air from the chamber. It was the kind of silence that made you question the fundamental laws of physics. The third Cathar, who had been standing rigidly, now twitched a bladed arm, as if swatting at an invisible insect. "You interrupt us," the lead Cathar boomed, its translated voice now edged with a raw, primal menace. It rose to its full, terrifying height, causing shadow to engulf our delegation. "Oh, apologies," Ambassador Javery said, without missing a beat, her gaze level with the Cathar's chest plates. "Just excited to get started. We believe synergy is key for new galactic partnerships. We even brought some samples, to break the ice." She gestured towards a hover pallet that had silently glided in behind us, carrying several covered containers. The Cathar leader's eyes narrowed, a movement that sent a ripple of fear through the other delegates. This was beyond impudence. It was an act of blatant disrespect, an affront to everything the Cathar stood for. "Samples," the translator hissed. "Of what?" "Of our hospitality," Dr. Aris chimed in, already pulling a cover off one of the containers. A complex aroma filled the air, a blend of earthy spices, sweet undertones, and something subtly smoky. "We call these orbital delights. Developed right here on Earth, using only locally sourced ingredients, of course. We're very big on sustainable practices." The Cathar delegation, who had been preparing to unleash a torrent of threats and demands, faltered. Their four eyes blinked in unison. They were accustomed to species cowering, or at least showing a minimal amount of survival instinct. Instead, these soft-skinned bipeds were offering them food and talking about sustainability. "This is not a social gathering," the Cathar leader growled, his voice now a low vibration that made the crystalline chandeliers of the chamber tinkle. Right, formal," Ambassador Javery conceded, though her expression was still bright. "But diplomacy at its core is about mutual understanding, isn't it? And what better way to understand a species than through its outputs, its creations, its sustenance?" She picked up a small, glistening sphere from the container and held it out. "Try one. It's vegan-friendly, packed with protein and a unique blend of Earth flora." The Cathar paused. Their threat displays, elaborate patterns of bioluminescent energy that usually pulsed across their chitinous bodies, flickered uncertainly. Their entire diplomatic strategy was based on intimidation, yet these humans were treating them like mild curiosities at best, and offering them spherical edibles. "It contains nutrients derived from processed plant matter." The Cathar's science officer, a slightly smaller Cathar with more intricate plating, finally articulated, his translated voice an unusual mix of suspicion and scientific curiosity. "Exactly," Dr. Aris beamed. "And it's a great source of complex carbohydrates. We found it really helps with long-duration voyages, when you need sustained energy. We've even experimented with infusing it with trace elements from different planetary biomes to optimize nutrient absorption for varied metabolisms. Our initial projections suggest it could significantly increase energy yield for species with high basal metabolic rates, like yours." Catharn carefully picked up the sphere. It was surprisingly light, yet firm. He brought it close to his primary sensor array, a complex organ behind his faceplates. His multifaceted eyes analyzed its surface. Then, with a sudden, decisive movement, he crushed it between two of his bladed digits. A pungent, sweet-and-sour aroma wafted from the crushed remains. "It smells complex," the Cathar science officer clicked, translating for Catharn. "That's the fermented spirulina and the synthetic fruit extract," Dr. Aris explained eagerly, pulling out a tablet. "We call it the umami factor. It's designed to trigger multiple neural pathways associated with pleasure and satiety. We've also experimented with a version that includes a mild psychoactive component, just to enhance receptivity, but we thought we'd keep it simple for the first contact. Several delegates gasped. Psychoactive components. For a first contact. Elias felt a cold dread begin to coil in his stomach. He'd always dismissed Aris's more eccentric ideas as mere academic curiosity, but hearing it framed in this context, aimed at the Cathar, it was unsettling. Catharn then did something even more astonishing. He licked the residue from his bladed digit. His body stiffened and his bioluminescent patterns flared, not in anger, but in what appeared to be surprise. Confusion. The taste, it is multifaceted, the translator clicked. It suggests endurance, persistence, and a peculiar sweetness. Ambassador Javri smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Exactly, that's the human spirit in a nutshell. Adaptability, persistence, and a surprising capacity for sweetness. Now about that cultural integration program. The rest of the galactic delegation watched this exchange with a mixture of horror and fascination, like witnessing a particularly tenacious protozoan attempting to negotiate with a black hole. Several species began discreetly placing bets on how long the humans would survive. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a very interesting and deeply unsettling diplomatic relationship. High Commander Catharn, who had spent millennia honing his species' reputation for brutal efficiency and unyielding conquest, found himself in an entirely novel situation. His initial response had been to crush the soft-skinned bipeds, to assert Cathar dominance with the swiftness and finality of a collapsing star. Yet the humans spoke of synergy and umami factors with a disarming earnestness that baffled his strategic protocols. Perhaps you do not understand your position, small prey species, Catharn finally rumbled, his voice dropping to a menacing growl that had caused countless civilizations to experience spontaneous orbital decay. His bladed digits extended, glinting like polished obsidian. We have assimilated entire worlds. Their resources, their knowledge, their very essence now fuel our expansion. Ambassador Javri nodded thoughtfully, as if considering a valid point. Assimilation is certainly a powerful approach. We've found similar patterns in Earth's own history. It's fascinating, really, how often civilizations evolve to absorb rather than just destroy. What was your most comprehensive assimilation, if you don't mind me asking? My own stomach tightened. The ambassador was playing a dangerous game, delving into Cathar history. Their conquests were legendary, horrific tales whispered across the galactic arm. Catharn's bioluminescent patterns flared, shifting from angry reds to a pulsating violet. We incorporated the Archon hegemony, their entire network of orbital factories, their data archives, their technological base, all absorbed. Their population was repurposed. Repurposed? Dr. Aris asked, her eyes lighting up with genuine curiosity. Like for biomass? Or did you integrate their workforce? We've found that proper talent utilization can really boost productivity, even after a hostile takeover. Though, of course, ethical considerations are paramount. Ethical considerations. The Cathar, a species that viewed other life forms as mere resources, seemed to short-circuit. Ethical considerations are irrelevant, Catharn clicked, his voice a low thrum. Survival is the only ethic. Ah, but survival without a clear purpose can be rather dull, can't it? Ambassador Javri countered smoothly. We humans, for instance, survived for millennia, and then we started developing things purely for pleasure. Art, music, complex culinary traditions, competitive sports. We even figured out how to domesticate some of our most dangerous predators. We don't just survive, we optimize existence. Catharn slammed two of his bladed limbs onto the conference table, leaving deep gouges in the supposedly indestructible material. Several smaller species dove under their seats. You mock us, he snarled, his breath hot enough to fog the human's glasses. Mock you? Not at all, I heard myself say, surprising even myself with my sudden interjection. We're genuinely fascinated. We've got some historical documents, for instance, about how we went from being apex predators to domesticating wolves. You know, taking a creature capable of tearing you limb from limb and turning it into a cuddly companion. It's a testament to interspecies cooperation. The Cathar paused, their multifaceted eyes shifting. Their universal translators must be malfunctioning. These soft-clothed creatures just casually mentioned domesticating predators that could kill them for companionship. We hunt your domesticated predators. Catharn's science officer clicked, sounding utterly baffled. Oh no, never, Dr. Aris replied, horrified. They're family, we hunt other things with them, it's quite efficient. We even taught them to fetch things and beg for treats. It's truly a symbiotic relationship. We feed them, they help us hunt, and they provide emotional support. Catharn's threat displays flickered uncertainly. Their entire diplomatic strategy was based on intimidation. Yet these humans were treating them like a species that might benefit from a pet. They spoke of domestication as a form of cultural integration, of turning a deadly threat into a loyal asset. We have decimated entire species. Catharn tried one more time, his voice a desperate attempt to reassert dominance. Only entire species. Ambassador Javery raised an eyebrow, a subtle gesture that somehow conveyed more condescension than any roar. That's quaint. We accidentally decimated species we weren't even trying to hunt. Did you know we nearly wiped out whales just to light some lamps? Dark times, really. We feel pretty bad about that now. Very big on conservation these days. Unless, of course, the species poses an existential threat, in which case, well, we adapt. The other delegates watched in fascinated horror as the mighty Cathar experienced something entirely new. Profound, species-wide confusion. Their fearsome reputation, built on millennia of conquest, was eroding under the relentless, cheerful, and utterly baffling assault of human casualness. Your soft flesh would tear easily in our claws, hissed one of Catharn's subordinates, a Cathar warrior named Cathrax. Probably, I said cheerfully, surprising myself again. It felt like I was speaking on autopilot, channeling some innate human impulse. We're pretty squishy. That's why we invented these neat things called personal force fields. And then we felt those weren't efficient enough, so we made bigger energy projectors. And then we felt really bad about those too. We're working on it. We've got some impulse control issues as a species, but we're learning. Which reminds me, Dr. Aris added, looking at her tablet. We really should finalize this dinner plan. We're thinking of serving something called volcanic core as an appetizer. You know, start things off with a bang. The Cathar huddled together, speaking in rapid, guttural clicks. These humans were clearly insane. They spoke of extinction-level hunting with nostalgia, treated apex predators like dinner party guests, and seemed to have no concept of proper terror. When they turned back, Catharn's voice had lost some of its menacing edge. We will consider your invitation. Great. Ambassador Javery beamed, pulling out her own compad. And don't worry about dietary restrictions. We humans can cook pretty much anything. Comes from being adaptable omnivores, though between you and me, I think the biosynthetics might be on to something. Back on their flagship, the Oblivion Scythe, the Cathar held what had to be the most unusual war council in their species' history. The massive chamber, decorated with the desiccated remains of their most impressive kills, seemed somehow less intimidating after their encounter with the humans. It must be a trap, declared Subcommander Cathax, pacing on all sixes, having dropped to his auxiliary limbs in agitation. No species invites predators to dinner unless they plan to poison them. Or perhaps they plan to serve us to their domesticated beasts. Catharn sat on his throne of compressed battlefield armor, scrolling through the official dinner invitation on his datapad. The humans had sent it with something called holographic emoticons, little animated images of a smiling human chef, and a plate of steaming food. The research team has analyzed their chemical composition, reported Science Officer Cathix, her plating shifting nervously. Humans are indeed omnivores, but their digestive system is remarkable. They can process substances that would kill most species. They deliberately consume fermented items for pleasure. For pleasure. Several Cathar hissed in disbelief. There's more, Kathix continued, her vocal clicks unusually strained. They regularly ingest capsaicin for entertainment. They introduce toxic bacterial cultures into their food to enhance flavor. They drink liquid stimulants that would stop most hearts, and they call it morning brew. Their historical records show them consuming what they refer to as rotting fish and molded fungus as delicacies. Meanwhile, across the Concordium's diplomatic sector, an unprecedented betting pool was forming. The Galactic Exchange's oddsmakers were working overtime. 5,000 credits on the humans serving something that burns the Cathar mouths, shouted a Centurion delegate. 10,000 on the Cathar fleeing before the main course, countered an Andromedan. The Chitinoid Bureaucratic Union, normally strict about gambling regulations, was too busy placing their own bets to enforce any rules. Back at the human embassy, preparations were in full swing. I found Ambassador Javery in the massive kitchen, reviewing plans with our team of chefs. "All right, folks, we've got to nail this," she announced, looking over the prep stations. "First impressions are everything. Our anthropologists say the Cathar value displays of prowess and strategic resource acquisition. So we're going full culinary integration on this one." "Ma'am," called out Chef Wren, a man whose calm demeanor belied his culinary genius, "the volcanic core appetizer is ready for testing. We've had to add warning labels in 3 languages and equip the taste testers with full biohazard suits." "Perfect," Javery nodded approvingly. "And the main course, the nebula roast, been slow cooking for 24 hours already," Wren confirmed. "Using that orbital aging technique you provided, Ambassador, the molecular structure is collapsing beautifully. It'll be so tender it'll melt in their mandibles." "Remember," Javery said, her voice dropping slightly, "we're not just cooking dinner. We're demonstrating humanity's mastery over matter, over biology, over even the most resistant of palates. We're showing these apex predators how we integrate." The Cathar High Council continued their debate. "They sent us their menu," Cathax announced, his bladed limbs gesturing wildly. "I don't understand half these words. What is fermented Stardew cheese?" "According to their data, it's a dairy product aged for an extended period, sometimes deliberately inoculated with beneficial microorganisms," Cathix explained. "Humans intentionally allow their food to decompose in specific ways before eating it. Sometimes they even add a substance they call mold to enhance flavor." Harn leaned forward on his throne. "And this nebula roast process. They take an animal, apply sustained heat and smoke for extended periods, and add various compounds to enhance flavor. The process can take Earth days. They've turned slow dissolution into a culinary art form. They reduce a living creature to its fundamental components, then reassemble it into a new, desirable form." The council chamber fell silent as this information sank in. Either the most brilliant trap makers in the galaxy," Catharn mused, "or they're exactly as creatively destructive as they appear to be." A junior officer burst into the chamber looking distressed. "High Commander, we've intercepted communications. The humans are discussing something called competitive eating contests. They turn consumption into a sport, and they have a historical record of an individual consuming over 70 tubular meats in under 10 minutes. In the embassy kitchen, my own compad chimed with a message. "Good news, everyone," Ambassador Javery announced. "The Cathar have officially accepted. They're bringing something called ceremonial conquest trophies to display. Should we be concerned, Elias?" "No, Ambassador," I stammered, still reeling from the competitive eating factoid. "We'll just put up some of our family photos, and perhaps some of our historical artifacts of integration." The betting pools across the galaxy reached fever pitch. The Arcturus Insurance Corporation was refusing to cover any aspect of the event, citing justifiable concerns about mixing apex predators with clearly unhinged primates. The Concordium's xenopsychology department had to bring in extra staff just to handle the influx of research requests. Nobody had ever seen Cathar uncertain before. It was revolutionizing their entire field of study. Has anyone informed the humans that the Cathar once ate an entire diplomatic team? Asked a concerned council member. Yes, replied another, sounding utterly defeated. They said something about raising the stakes and then laughed for several minutes. We believe it was some form of wordplay, but our linguists are still analyzing it. As the day of the dinner approached, final preparations were made on both sides. The Cathar polished their ceremonial armor and sharpened their display claws. The humans marinated meat, stoked fires, and argued about whether to serve synthesized ambrosia or a potent earth spirits with the main course. A Chitanoid observer noted in their official report. The humans appear to be treating this potentially apocalyptic diplomatic event with the same level of concern as a neighborhood cookout. Either they have achieved a level of technological superiority we cannot detect, or they are operating on a plane of existence where common sense simply does not apply. Their casualness is alarming. The betting odds shifted hourly. The only consensus was that something unprecedented was about to happen, and nobody wanted to miss it. The human embassy had been transformed into what Ambassador Javary proudly called a proper Earth-style sensory experience. The main diplomatic hall now featured long, low tables made from actual Earth hardwoods, covered in woven fibers of indeterminate alien origin. The air filtration system wafted the subtle scent of hickory smoke, mingled with something vaguely metallic and sweet. Mounted on the walls were various Earth artifacts of integration, including a series of framed photographs depicting the evolutionary journey of the wolf from wild predator to domesticated companion, a haunting progression of selective breeding and behavioral conditioning. The Cathar's own trophies, jagged shards of conquered civilizations and skeletal remains of vanquished foes, would have pride of place on the opposite wall, creating what Javary called a nice balanced atmosphere of mutual appreciation for fundamental change. The outdoor section of the embassy had been configured to match Earth's atmospheric conditions, complete with artificial gravity set to Earth normal. The centerpiece was a massive, custom-built molecular decomposer and resynthesizer that Chef Wren had specifically designed for the event. Its size suggested it could probably convert an entire star whale into edible components. Knowing humans, it probably had. Temperature holding steady at optimal molecular agitation point, Chef Wren reported, his voice calm. The nebula roast is reassembling perfectly, ribs are almost done, and the volcanic core paste has already corroded 3 sampling implements. The Cathar arrived precisely on schedule, their massive transport ship casting a shadow over the embassy's landing pad. They emerged in full ceremonial armor, carrying display cases containing what appeared to be the preserved remnants of conquered species technologies and philosophies. Welcome. Ambassador Javary greeted them at the door, wearing an apron that read, "Warning. May convert calories into philosophical quandaries. Love the armor, High Commander. It really brings out the bioluminescence in your plating." Catharn's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. The human wasn't even armed, unless that large, ornate chef's knife tucked into Chef Wren's belt was some kind of ceremonial weapon. "We have brought trophies of our greatest hunts," announced Cathax, clearly expecting the humans to be intimidated. "Awesome," Dr. Aris chirped, gesturing to the wall. "We've got space right next to our display on the domestication of the Earth feline. You know, the funny thing about cats, sometimes they scratch you, make you bleed, and then demand food. It really highlights the dynamic between mastery and subservience, doesn't it? Makes the interaction more meaningful." The Cathar exchanged glances. These humans spoke about being physically harmed by their pets, as if discussing the weather. As they moved to the dining area, various Earth food aromas hit the Cathar's sensitive chemoreceptors. Their universal translators struggled to process Ambassador Javary's enthusiastic explanations. "So, this first course is just a little something to wake up the taste buds," Javary began, gesturing to small, glowing orbs. "We call them volcanic cores. Don't worry, no actual magma involved, just bioengineered capsicum analogs and synthesized thermal stimulants. We breed them specially to be extra potent for fun. These plants, Kathix asked cautiously, her plating twitching. They are painful. Oh no, they just cause intense sensory overload and sometimes induce mild neurological euphoria, Javery replied cheerfully, popping one into her mouth. Her face turned a subtle shade of crimson, but her smile never wavered. Perfect heat level, the first course was served. The Cathar, driven by pride and an unwillingness to show weakness, followed their host's example. Several seconds later, Catharn's bioluminescent displays went into overdrive, his plating pulsing with an almost violent internal light. Water makes it worse, I advised, my voice sounding strangely detached, passing them glasses of something called lunar nectar, a chilled, sugary fluid designed to counteract capsaicin. Trust me on this one. It's all about the cool-down phase after the ignition event. As the evening progressed, the humans revealed more shocking aspects of their dietary habits and their broader relationship with existence. They explained how they discovered Stardew cheese, which they described as, "We found out you could take the nutrient-rich Stardew collected from nebulae, let it go bad in exactly the right way, introduce specific fungal cultures, and eat it." They explained their love of morning brew, a bitter, dark liquid that makes you faster and more irritable, but we love it. And then, the concept of competitive eating. The record for orbital dogs is 76 in 10 minutes, but the real pride and joy, Ambassador Javery announced, as the main course arrived, is this nebula roast. Slow-cooked for 24 hours at optimal molecular agitation, using our proprietary aging technique. We basically took one of the most resilient star beasts and showed it who's boss through sheer, patient molecular deconstruction. The Cathar, still recovering from the volcanic cores, watched as slices of perfectly reassembled meat were placed before them. The humans had turned slow cooking into psychological warfare against food. "You torture your food before eating it?" Cathax asked, both horrified and impressed. "Torture," Javery chuckled. "Now, we prefer to call it tenderizing with extreme prejudice. Wait till you hear about what we do to the deep-sea crustaceans, or the fungal spores we cultivate to consume waste products and then turn into gourmet delicacies, or the symbiotic algae we engineer to live in our stomachs to help us digest almost anything." As the Cathar cautiously sampled the nebula roast, their expressions shifted from suspicion to surprise, to something approaching respect. The meat was perfectly cooked, seasoned with a complex blend of elements that their sensors couldn't fully analyze. "This is how we usually prefer our meat," I explained, slicing into my portion, finding myself speaking with an ease that chilled me. "Though some humans like it rare, still vibrating with life. And there's this one dish called molecular tartare where we just don't cook it at all. Raw cellular matter, living protein, a bit of seasoning, delicious. Raw." Several Cathar dropped their utensils, a clatter of metal on hard table. "Oh yeah, we can eat lots of things raw," Dr. Aris confirmed. "Live fish, raw meat, unfertilized eggs as long as it's fresh. Well, except for some fish. Sometimes we let that ferment first. There's this thing called surströmming." Harn held up a bladed hand. "You intentionally ferment fish before consumption." "Sure," Javery beamed. "Along with vegetables, dairy, beans, pretty much anything really. If it exists, someone somewhere has probably fermented it and turned it into a delicacy. It's a way of unlocking new flavors, new textures, new ways to interact with the universe's bounty." Javery took a sip of her spirits, another fermented beverage, as she cheerfully explained. The Cathar were beginning to understand why the humans had seemed so unafraid during their first meeting. Any species that deliberately cultivated pain-inducing plants for snacking, aged their food until it chemically transformed, and showed such dedication to the art of molecular deconstruction wasn't to be trifled with. Their adaptability wasn't just survival. It was an active, ongoing process of redefining their environment and its contents. "You know what would go great with this roast?" I asked, reaching for a bottle. Our home blend, solar flare sauce. It's got 7 different types of bioengineered peppers and a hint of synthesized umami. Had to sign a waiver to get it through Concordium Customs. As the dinner progressed into what Javery called the digestive contemplation phase, I pulled out a datapad to show our guests some Earth history. The Cathar, now significantly more relaxed thanks to several bottles of aged Earth spirits, which they'd initially suspected was some form of weapons-grade fuel, leaned in with interest. So here's the thing about humans, I began, pulling up some images. We didn't start at the top of the food chain. We had to work our way up, through sheer stubbornness and creativity, and a particular knack for recontextualization. You mean your weapons? Cathax asked, who was starting to develop a taste for Earth bourbon. Nah, well before that. See this? I showed them a recreation of early humans pursuing a mammoth. We used to hunt things way bigger than us through persistence hunting. Just followed them until they got tired. Imagine being that mammoth. Every time you think you've lost the weird naked apes, they show up again, just casually jogging along for days. You tracked prey by exhausting them. Catharn seemed both disturbed and fascinated. Yep. We were basically the horror movie monster of the animal kingdom. Slow but unstoppable. Can't outrun us in the long term. We'll just keep coming. And then once it dropped, we'd utilize every part. Bones for tools, hide for shelter, meat for sustenance. Nothing wasted. Everything repurposed. The Cathar watched footage of various human hunting methods throughout history, the spear throwers, the pit traps, the coordinated group hunts. Their respect grew with each example, but it wasn't just the hunting. It was the ingenuity of turning a larger, faster, stronger foe into a resource. But here's where it gets really interesting, I continued, switching to images of Earth's original apex predators. These are some of our planet's ultimate predators, great white sharks, tigers, lions, Kodiak bears, formidable, efficient killers, and we figured out how to hunt them all. Not always because we had to, mind you. Sometimes just to prove we could, or to understand their mechanisms, or to extract a desirable trait. The Cathar studied the images with professional interest. These creatures, they are formidable, Cathix admitted. Oh yeah. A tiger can kill you in seconds. Bears can run at ridiculous speeds and crush your skull with one paw. But you know what we did? I showed them pictures of dogs. We looked at their ancestral wolf, one of Earth's most successful predators, and we thought, hey, bet we could turn their babies into pets. And we did. Through selective breeding, through behavioral conditioning, through centuries of careful, deliberate integration. Now we have Chihuahuas. I showed them a picture of a tiny, trembling dog, then a ferocious wolf. Same species, different manifestation. You modified apex predators into companions. Cathax's translator struggled with the concept. Modified might be a strong word, I explained, a cold realization dawning on me even as I spoke. We just understood their core drives: hunger, loyalty, pack instinct, and we redirected them. Gave them treats and belly rubs for a few thousand generations. Now they help us hunt other things, or they provide emotional support, or they're just decorative. It's the circle of life, you know, reimagined. The Cathar were beginning to understand why their initial intimidation tactics had failed so spectacularly. They were dealing with a species that had stared down Earth's most dangerous predators and thought, cute, let's reprogram it for our own benefit. But the real kicker, I continued, pulling up more images, the words flowing from me now, an almost pre-programmed recitation of humanity's true nature, is that we're not even obligate carnivores. We can eat almost anything. Plants, meat, fungi. There's probably someone somewhere trying to figure out how to make rocks edible right now. We've got colonies of bacteria living in our guts that help us digest things that would kill most species. We don't just consume, we integrate the means of consumption. Our biology is not fixed. It is a constantly evolving assimilation engine. Catharn, who had moved on to trying something called tequila, nodded thoughtfully, his multifaceted eyes fixed on mine. This explains much about your species' approach to diplomacy. When you can eat everything, when you can modify anything, suddenly the galaxy becomes a lot less intimidating and a lot more delicious. The power dynamic in the room had shifted subtly but significantly. The Cathar were no longer seeing humans as potential prey or even as equals, but as something entirely new. A species cunning enough to chase animals until they died of exhaustion, tough enough to digest almost anything, and innovative enough to turn predators into pets. But more than that, a species that didn't just conquer or destroy, it assimilated. It broke down, reformed, and integrated. Its very essence was consumption, not just of food but of concepts, of traits, of threats. "You know," Catharn said, examining his glass of whiskey, "perhaps we should discuss that cultural integration program you mentioned. We too have knowledge that could be repurposed." "Great idea," Ambassador Javery beamed. "We could start with a culinary ethics class. Ever heard of something called fugu? It's this fish that's super poisonous unless you prepare it just right. We turned it into a delicacy. It's a perfect example of overcoming inherent toxicity through learned skill and precise handling. A metaphor for interspecies relations, really." The Cathar's universal translators gave up entirely at this point, sputtering and clicking erratically. But they got the general idea. They were dealing with a species that not only survived but thrived by turning everything, even things that could kill them, into either food, pets, or sporting opportunities, or more chillingly, into parts of themselves. To adaptability, to integration, Catharn raised his glass in what he'd learned was a human tradition. And to new ingredients. "Exactly," Javery responded, seemingly oblivious to the terrifying subtext. "Now, who's ready to hear about this thing we invented called a chili cook-off?" The next Interstellar Concordium Council meeting was a spectacle that would be recorded in history books across multiple star systems. The Cathar arrived, not in their traditional battle armor, but wearing what appeared to be custom-tailored garments of woven earth fibers, gifts from their new human allies. The betting pools across the galaxy collectively crashed when Catharn and Ambassador Javery walked in, sharing something called spiced hydro jerky, while discussing the finer points of molecular deconstruction techniques. "You should see what they do with something called a fermentation vat," Catharn was explaining to a thoroughly confused Centurion delegate. "The patients required to maintain optimal microbial activity for months. Truly a hunt of endurance, of controlled decay." The Chitinoid Bureaucratic Union had to create an entirely new classification system just to categorize the alliance documents between humans and Cathar. Nobody had ever seen a peace treaty that included mandated culinary exchanges and trait acquisition protocols as core articles. "Let me get this straight," the council head, a massive multi-limbed creature of the ethery, spoke carefully, its voice like shifting tectonic plates. "You're proposing joint resource optimization expeditions with a culinary focus." "Precisely," Javery clarified. "The Cathar have some amazing techniques for tracking and locating unique biological signatures across asteroid fields, and we've got some fantastic methods for preparing and integrating those resources into new forms. Imagine the nutritional possibilities and the new flavors." The alliance turned out to be more than just a culinary exchange. The Cathar brought their extensive knowledge of tracking and resource acquisition, while humans shared their expertise in turning literally anything into either food or a concept to be absorbed. Or both. News spread across the galaxy about the first joint human-Cathar Bioresource Integration Festival. The event had to be held in a specially reinforced station after someone mentioned the concept of deep-frying novel organisms to the Cathar. The resulting fusion cuisine created several new entries in the galactic database of technically not weapons, but terrifyingly effective consumables. The Xenopsychology department had to revise their entire understanding of predatory species psychology. The sight of Cathar warriors enthusiastically participating in something called a spice blending competition challenged every existing theory they had. "They've started a culinary institute," reported one thoroughly confused analyst. "The humans are teaching them about flavor profiles and something called gastronomic fusion. They're turning potential threats into culinary opportunities." The other species watched in amazement as the most feared predators in the galaxy began taking cooking classes. Hunting grounds were being converted into bioresource farms. Battle cruisers were being retrofitted with industrial kitchens. "The humans have introduced them to competitive eating contests," whispered a horrified Andromedan observer. "They're combining their natural competitive instincts with human biological capabilities. Do you have any idea what this means? They're not just conquering, they're ingesting." The implications were indeed far-reaching. Other predator species, witnessing the curious transformation of the Cathar, began approaching humans for cultural exchanges, leading to an unprecedented era of gastronomic diplomacy. The galaxy watched in equal parts horror and fascination as humans taught apex predators about the concept of food blogs and recipe-sharing networks. In the human embassy, I was reviewing plans for the first intergalactic food festival. Catharn, surprisingly, was examining something called a pizza menu with intense concentration. You put fermented Stardew cheese on a flatbread with processed meats and pineapple. The Cathar commander sounded intrigued, rather than horrified, which said everything about how much things had changed. "That's actually our most controversial food item," Ambassador Javery explained. "Started more philosophical debates than our entire military history. It's a testament to our capacity for embracing the unconventional." The final proof of the Alliance's success came when Cathar ships began broadcasting culinary shows instead of threat displays. Their traditional war chants were gradually replaced with heated debates about proper protein resequencing temperatures. As I watched Catharn carefully flipping something he called planetary fritters on the embassy's grill, the Cathar commander had insisted on learning proper technique. I couldn't help but smile. Who would have thought that humanity's greatest diplomatic achievement would come not from their strength or technology, but from their profound, unsettling relationship with consumption? "You know," Catharn mused, "the perfect flip of a fritter. Perhaps we weren't the apex predators after all. You humans, you didn't just hunt. You turned hunting into an art form, then into a social activity, then into entertainment, then into a means of integration. You don't just consume resources, you consume concepts. You consume species. You consume existence itself." "That's humanity for you," I replied, the smile feeling cold on my face. The chilling truth, once a whisper, now a roaring gale in my mind. We've never met something we couldn't either eat, befriend, or turn into a competitive sport, or ultimately become. The galaxy would never be the same, but maybe that was for the best. After all, it's hard to start a war when you're too busy arguing about whether a new species is more suitable for fusion cuisine or domestic integration. And as for Elia's thorn, I was just a human, just like all the others. And I was learning to accept the hunger that lay at the heart of us all. The true, terrifying hunger. What chilling truth do you think lies at the core of humanity? Share your thoughts below and follow for more stories that explore the darker side of existence.